Hi, I'm Mark Reed. Follow me as I attempt to put my new book, Impact Culture, into practice and discuss it with others taking a similar journey. You'll get tips that will help you achieve more impact from your research and stay healthy, no matter how busy you are. Rediscover your purpose. Lead from behind to empower those around you. Transform your work culture. Welcome to Season 4 of the Fast Track Impact Podcast. So this week I want to think about leadership. And I'm asking specifically, what kind of leadership do we need if we want to lead impact? Now, I've got a whole chapter in the Impact Culture book on this, and I've suggested that the kind of leadership we need is empathic leadership. But I want to break this down, and so I'm going to discuss some of the ideas in the chapter. But since writing the book, so I finished writing the book well over a year ago now, I've been exploring this particular aspect in much more depth. I've got 4 blogs now, and I'll put a link to the most relevant one just in the show notes. And I want to draw on some of the latest thinking that I've been doing about this and my own experience as a new leader, in the hope that by the end of this episode, and perhaps the next one, I think I'll do at least a couple on this theme, that you'll have a sense of the things that you can do as a leader, but also if you are a follower, you are not in a leadership position, what you can do to become the kind of leader that you crave for without having to change line manager or change jobs, to actually lead impact for yourself in your own unique way. So when I think about leadership, when I think most of us think about leadership, we tend to think about autocratic leaders. And I think that the media has something to do with this, because if a leader decides something and then changes their mind, they are characterized as weak leaders. If a leader decides they want to deliberate, to get lots of different people's opinions before they make a decision, if they want to delay in order to make time for that deliberation, they are again caricatured as indecisive and as a poor leader. And of course, in reality, we want people to have the humility to realise when they're wrong. And when the evidence suggests that they're wrong, we expect good leaders, in reality, to change their minds. We expect good leaders to actually think for themselves, to deliberate, to get broad evidence for what they're doing. We don't expect them to just make snap decisions and then stick to them, despite the fact that they're clearly wrong. And yet, the media portrays people like that as weak leaders, and we vote in, therefore, whatever country we live in, and I'm not making any political judgment about my own country here, but we vote in typically these supposedly strong leaders who are decisive and who always stick to their guns. But is that the kind of leadership that we need if we want to actually achieve change in the world? And I hope that you're with me here. Surely not. Is that the kind of leader that any of us actually want? And yet those are the things that kind of intrinsically come to mind. When I ask you to think of a leader, most people think about those kinds of people, or at least those kinds of characteristics. So if I want a leader that is going to change the world, that is going to lead a team to achieve impacts, what are the kind of things that you need? Well, have a think to yourself. What things come to mind? And I guess the easy things that come to mind for me are, well, you need to be inventive, original. If this is a problem that you're trying to solve that nobody's been able to solve before, then that's got to be part of this. There's got to be some kind of strength of character in here to push through against the odds when everything seems to be going wrong. We're going to want to inspire others to lead us. But still, I kind of feel like, yeah, okay, those are kind of some easy answers, but they still lead us to that kind of big leader who leads from the front and inspires others to follow them and pushes through with their great idea, even if it's maybe not quite working and isn't as great an idea as they thought, kind of thing. And so I've been thinking about a very different model of leadership, which instead of leading from in front, is about leading from behind. That doesn't get a lot of credit, that is more humble than it is proud, that is about understanding the people in our teams to enable them to achieve their potential, and together then collectively for us to all achieve that potential and to achieve something that we can all feel is something that we jointly own. So the kind of leaders that we're thinking about here, I would suggest, are significantly different to the kind of things that instantly come to mind when we think about leadership. And so I want you to have a think to yourself now about leaders that you have gravitated towards. And it may be a small number. In fact, I was doing a presentation to some colleagues in the Netherlands. This was leaders of business schools. It was a leadership session, so leaders of business schools across Europe. And I asked them to tell me what proportion of leaders have they had that they have truly looked up to, that have inspired them. And the majority of them said, maybe some, but probably few. And a few of the people said, actually, none of them. And there wasn't a single person who said all of them. And there were very few people who said that most of those leaders that they've had were people that they could really look up to, who really inspired them. And so how would you answer that question? What proportion of leaders have you really felt able to look up to as role models, as people who inspire you? And if I were to ask you to visualize a person now in that kind of role, someone who was a role model, whether or not they were actually in a leadership role, it doesn't have to actually be a traditional leader, but someone who was a role model, who influenced you for good professionally, who enabled you to achieve things that you did not think would ever have been possible, who supported you, who was your cheerleader, whatever it was, that someone who genuinely, deeply inspired you and changed who you are today and how you do what you do. So have a think, who would be someone who fits that category? And I'm going to suggest, whoever that person is, why don't you actually reach out to them and just say, because leaders don't get a lot of positive feedback, and just say, look, I was listening to this podcast, someone asked me to reflect and to identify someone who was a real role model, who influenced me, who changed me for good, and I couldn't help but think of you. And here's why. And why don't you do that as an exercise to actually break down in words, what is the why for you? Why were they so inspiring? So for me, the person that instantly comes to mind is Professor Hanifa Shah. She was Associate Dean for Research at the time at Birmingham City University. And although she wasn't technically my line manager, she was in charge of research for the faculty that I was in. And there was something about Hanifa that was just, I was just drawn to her. She was busy, but she made time for me. And I looked forward to those meetings. Because in those meetings, we spoke about strategy and what was going on from her side and how I could help and whatever else. But she spoke to me and saw me. And there was a sense of being deeply seen by her, as she was genuinely curious about what I was doing and what impact it might be having. Not just in terms of how that might help her and the faculty, but because she seemed genuinely interested in me and in what I was doing. There was a sense of nurturing that when she found that out, if there was something that was a challenge, that she wanted to know what those challenges were. And she couldn't solve all of those problems, but where she could, then she would connect me with someone or help me to work through that challenge. And there was a real sense that she was there behind me, supporting me. If something went wrong, I could go to her. Even if I'd made a mistake and I was actually pretty embarrassed about it and there were going to be consequences, I could go to her and I knew that she would not judge me, that she would see me for the person I am and realise that my heart is in the right place. I just sometimes make mistakes. There was a humility there that meant that she would never stand in judgment over me. And I did have those kind of conversations with her. When I was depressed, I went to her and I said, "Look, I've been told to take a bit of time off. I'm not sure that I'm up for actually taking months of time off because I might go crazy. But I'm thinking about taking a day off, and can I go down to a 4-day week?" And her answer was, "Well, yeah, of course you can go down to a full 4-day week, but if you are still achieving everything that you're meant to achieve, then there's no reason that you should receive less pay for that." And so I continued to achieve everything that I was meant to achieve, and I did that on full pay. And she let me take enough time off to get over the worst of it. And that was just, incredible. And I guess the final thing is the humility, which was her final act, which was to say, "You know what, Mark? You've got this offer to go to Newcastle University. It's in the Russell Group. You've got all of these resources at your disposal with this particular chair position that you've been offered." And I said to her, "Look, this is the best job I've had, Hanifa. I don't want to leave. And yet, I know this is an offer of a lifetime. I have to think about it." And she was like, "You do not have to think about this. You just have to take the job. And we'll be fine without you. But this is, you will fly. If you can get this and you can build on this, big things will happen." And she was right. And I took the job with her blessing, and it was her who persuaded me ultimately to take the job against her own interests. And that is, for me, the kind of, I guess, servant leadership model, which is one model that I've heard spoken about, that for me inspires me most deeply and has influenced me. So who is this person for you? And what are their characteristics? Why did they inspire you? Why do you feel drawn to them? What was going on there? And my next question to you is, well, look at those characteristics and ask yourself, is there at least one of those characteristics that you have in common with them? Where do you find that meeting of minds, that coincidence, that, actually, humility is not something that I do well. I struggle with insecurity, and as a result, I resort to false pride and look at my Google Scholar citations, for example, and just be embarrassing. Pride is an issue for me. Humility is not something that comes naturally. Although I inadvertently become humble just because of my insecurities sometimes. But that's that idea of connecting, of seeing others, of being curious, and delving into the point that I am genuinely caring and interested in exactly what's going for them, and want to do anything I can to meet them and help them with what they need at that point. Okay, I can get on with that. I can relate to that. And maybe now this is a foothold for the kind of leader I could be. If I can do that, could I do some of the other things? Well, how did Hanifa demonstrate that humility? How did she cultivate that? And ultimately, what I see in Hanifa is a deep sense of authenticity and of self-confidence, an intrinsic esteem that she has, that she doesn't need others to say that she's great. She doesn't need that sense of false pride when she's feeling low, and she is there able to give of herself with humility. So could I cultivate some of that? What are the things that you don't have that your inspirational leader has? And how did they get there? Maybe you can ask them. Maybe they might even mentor you or coach you if you're lucky and you ask them. Who knows? But ask yourself how you could build on that one thing you have in common to find more things that you could have in common in future as you grow into that kind of leadership. And my message is that you can be your own inspirational leader. You can be the kind of leader that you want to be, that you actually crave from others. There are no leaders like that in my life at the moment. Well, maybe I can actually provide some of this stuff for myself. and in so doing, provide the kind of leadership for those around me as well, who are also looking, craving for this kind of leader. And you don't have to be their line manager. You just have to reach out and give of yourself. Perhaps just take one person on per year to coach them and to help them. You just have to be one step ahead of them in something that they want to grow into, and you can provide that. Leadership is not for managers. It's for those who want to see change. So if you want to see change, then you need to lead it. Don't wait for someone else to fill the shoes of the leader that you always wanted. They might come along one day, but instead of waiting for that, see what you can do to become that leader, to provide that leadership for others, and perhaps even to nurture them into their own leadership role so that they can give back to you as well. And what we're beginning to talk about here now is this idea of empathic leadership, that we reach out to those around us. We key into what they might need. And with what little time, with what little gold we have in that pot within us to give, we then try to give that, to move into this form of leadership. Now, I think the critique of the idea of empathic leadership is that it's a weak form of leadership. Empathy is too nice to be strategic. It's about people-pleasing. I'm constantly just flip-flopping one decision versus another, depending on who's just come into my office and asked for something, because I just want to be nice to everyone. And of course, that's not what we're trying to achieve. As leaders, we have to be strategic. We have limited resources at our disposal. There is often hard decisions that have winners and losers. But as empathic leaders, we understand who the losers might be. We do that work. We deliberate. We think about it. We go and talk to those people, understand their fears, their concerns, to try and understand how we might be able to make a decision that is a win-win for them, or at least that ameliorates the worst negative impacts and enables them to see that we have seen them and that there are reasons why we are still going ahead with this, but we're doing everything we can to minimise its impact on them. And so we don't alienate them. But instead of weak, I would suggest that we can characterise empathic leadership as wise. Empathy adapts. It adapts to both the strengths and the needs of the people around us, so that we can then empower them to be and do their very best work. Who are the people that can do that one thing we need that might achieve impact? How can we work with them to do more of the stuff that they love and fill that role in the team, whilst protecting others in the team who would be terrified by the prospect of whatever that might be? I don't know, talking to the media. It's not something that I particularly enjoy. It just makes me anxious. But hey, there are other things that I love, and maybe that's my strength. And as a leader, I key into that. This is not about a one-size-fits-all approach. And in terms of the needs as well, I see the needs of my team. That person who needs to just take a bit of time out, have a bit of slack in their agenda for the next few weeks as they're dealing with whatever's going on in their personal life. And that's what teams are about. They're going to do the same for you as a leader, as a team member for their other teams when things go wrong in someone else's personal life. The skills that we need. Okay, actually, yeah, I can teach you that, or I can find the resources to put you on a training course. I can find someone who could mentor you with that stuff. We adapt to the strengths and to the needs, and as a result, we empower our teams. Now, there's loads of literature on this, very little literature on empathic leadership. Maybe that's a book I need to write, but let's have a look at what we've got out there. Democratic or participatory leadership is one leadership style that you can read about. And I would argue that empathy is what powers that form of leadership. Because if this is about engaging with our teams, with our stakeholders, understanding their hopes, their fears, their strengths, getting them to now engage in the decision-making processes, distributing those leadership roles and powers, and enabling the team to co-produce decisions and jointly take decisions. That is, for me, fundamentally empathic. I need to deeply understand my team, and that whole process enables us to all get to know each other more deeply than ever before, so that we are sure that we are making a decision that, if not, we all agree, and consensus is very often not the outcome of a participatory process. There is that sense of understanding. We don't agree with the decision, but we're not going to constantly revisit it and delegitimize it and try and undermine it because we felt like someone else made that decision for us and we disagree and we never had any ownership or buy-in. We see that it was fair. There was a legitimate process. We were seen, we were heard, we put our views in. Ultimately, a decision was made. I can see the reasons for which that decision was made. I still disagree with it, but I understand why. I was heard, I was seen, and you know what? That's life. Maybe the next decision goes with me, and I know there is a process that will enable me to have that say again, and there's every chance that it goes my way next time. Another mode of leadership is coaching leadership, a coaching leadership style. And this is, let's be very clear, very different from mentoring. I think that a lot of people figure, well, I'm the leader, I've been there, I've got the experience, that's why I was made the leader. And so now I'm going to mentor all of my staff. And actually the whole process is a bit paternalistic even judgmental in some cases. Because I know the best, and I'll tell you how to do this and to be like me, and I'm going to create lots of mini-me's now. Of course, coaching is about understanding what your teams need, keying into what individuals need, creating individual training plans, work plans, enabling each team member to play to their strengths, but then piecing that all together as a leader so that you have teams of people who are all learning on their own journeys, but fitting together into a team that does its best. I've got 4 of these, supporting and then delegating. So supporting is the third literature that you can find. Just Google these and you can get loads of resources. Is that the kind of leader that you are? This idea of leading from behind, of nurturing your staff, your colleagues, providing the tools, the resources, the capacity, creating the schemes that people can then apply for, creating coaching programs, all of those kinds of things, so that you can then get that second-hand glory of seeing others achieve based on what you enabled. And then finally, delegating. Delegating leadership styles, surprisingly, I still think are actually powered by empathy. Because if you effectively delegate, then you delegate based on people's strengths and weaknesses. And I'm not going to delegate the media the media interviews to the person for whom English is not their first language, and actually they struggle with English, but they are an absolutely incredible scientist. And in fact, probably have the greatest attention to detail, and the one person I'm going to trust most for the analysis of our project. But yeah, and I'm not going to give it to the person who suffers from anxiety, clearly. But here is the person who is eloquent. They love this kind of stuff. And great, it's going to be hugely motivational for them, so let's delegate this to them. You have to be empathic in order to delegate effectively, rather than just doling out jobs randomly and hoping for the best. That is not delegation. That's dumping on people. So let's dive into the book for a moment. I'm not going to read from the book. I'm going to kind of riff on a theme, I guess. So when you get to the book, you'll see that I'm suggesting that empathic leadership has 3 elements, 3 kind of pillars. The first is understanding your priorities and the priorities of those around you. but understanding those priorities in a way deeper way than just understanding what is the most urgent and important thing that you need to put on your to-do list. And how do you need to then manage all of the important and urgent things of your team? We're going way deeper than that. And I think maybe next week I'll do something on that and go into that in more depth. Also, another podcast episode, I think, will do this into more depth, is this idea of bridging expertise. So the idea that actually as a leader, it's not about the narrowness and depth of my expertise, which is the thing that we tend to value most in academia. But it is that more generalist expertise that can connect between disciplines, and that ability to connect to people and connect agendas, teams, individuals to achieve things that they couldn't otherwise achieve. And that is a really important role, I would argue, that we need if we want to achieve impact. And the third is this idea of service. And that's something that I'm doing some thinking on. I'm not sure if I'm ready to do a podcast on this yet. We'll see. See how I get on in the next few weeks. And to power this kind of leadership, there are some practical tools. It's not just theoretical stuff. And I'm going to think about this in the next segments of this episode and the next couple of episodes, and you can read more in the book. But we're looking at the kind of tools that you use in participatory and deliberative research. So it just so happens that I do research in this area, so I've got a whole load of tools, and I'm sharing some of those in the book. But if that's how you want to make decisions, really understanding what your teams want, maybe then joining your stakeholders with your teams if this is about impact, then there's a bunch of really interesting and powerful tools that can help you make better decisions as a leader. This is now not just leadership skills in chairing meetings. This is facilitation skills that manage power dynamics. This is not your standard project management skills. These are logic models and theories of change that enable you to see the big picture and enable you then to co-produce those impact plans with your stakeholders, not just your teams. And of course, stakeholder analysis is another tool to make sure you've got the right people in those processes making the right decisions with you. And if you're going to invest in training, let's make sure that as a leader we build the tools, and maybe include compassion training as part of this in the training program I've got later this year, and also on the podcast. Hopefully, I'll get someone who does compassion training, and we'll get to learn some of the things that she trains in. I'm looking forward to that very, very much. So. Empathic leadership, a whole load of things that we can think about, a model, a framework, and hopefully I've given you a sense of what this might look and feel like, and you've already got a sense, a feeling for what this might be like, as opposed to the traditional models of leadership that we tend to think about. And with this role model in mind, you're hopefully already feeling your way towards the kind of stuff that you're thinking about. So how can you take a next step practically to become that kind of leader? And I think that coaching is a really great way of doing this. So if you have a look at Times Higher Education magazine, just last month I published an article there on why every academic needs a coach, and as opposed to a mentor, and how this could be transformative. The business world does this on a regular basis, and I think we could all learn from this. And you can do this. I've had coaches throughout my career from an early career researcher. And it's surprising. You reach out to someone, especially someone later in their career, I've found, kind of coming up to retirement. And these are people that you would just think would never even answer your email, let alone say yes to, I'd be willing to coach or mentor you. And yet they say yes because they want legacy. That's what's going on often when they say yes to this. So who are these people? And could you reach out to someone? And might they actually say yes without having to pay them anything? Who is that person? And it's just someone who is one step ahead of you on this journey. And so I've typically had two coaches, so a professional coach or mentor, and some kind of more kind of personal development or spiritual coach or mentor. And increasingly now I've moved away from mentoring. That was what I had initially, and that was useful. People who've been there, done that, who can tell me how it works and help me with that. Read my papers, my grant applications, help advise on what I should be applying for, that kind of stuff. So I'm not knocking mentoring at all. But increasingly now this is about people who can create the kind of safe space in which I can deliberate, think deeply about what I want to achieve as a leader, who can then hold me to account on that and help me to solve my own leadership problems in ways that are authentic to me. So when I got my leadership role, I'm co-director of the Thriving Natural Capital Challenge Centre at Scotland's Rural College. I also employed myself a coach, and I'm at a point in my career where I can afford to do that. But I would beware. I got a quote from someone who works in the business world, and they were charging £400 per session. I have a coach that charges £50 per session, and I know that he also offers reduced rates for people who can't afford it. So have a look around, and you can get a very good, experienced coach that will not hopefully break the bank. And I know someone who is just going to be doing that once a month. I know someone else is doing it a couple of times a year. And so yeah, maybe you can afford to get yourself a coach. And I think what surprised me was when I first worked with this coach, and it was that kind of goal-setting thing. What do you want to achieve out of this? And I looked at my own leadership and what I needed to do in this kind of preparatory year before we actually formally launched the centre. And I realised that my weak points were my anxiety and my self-esteem. We talked about lots of different things, but I realised, you know what, actually, if I don't get a handle on my anxiety and my self-esteem, then I'm going to fall into the trap of false pride and doing things that will make me feel good about myself. I'm not going to have the courage I need to speak truth to power when I need to protect the interests of my colleagues. And actually, there's a lot of deep work that I need to do. So I'm quite glad that I'm not stepping into a ready-made centre, that I get this year to prepare before we actually launch. And I think this is particularly pertinent because my first ever leadership role was a little bit of a disaster. It didn't entirely go according to plan. I was, to give myself a little bit of self-compassion, technically an early career researcher at the time. I was deputy director of a research centre. And then the director took long-term sick, and I got made the director in his stead. And I was completely unprepared for the psychological baggage of people that I'd previously considered friends, who suddenly felt compelled to fight me alongside every other authority figure that they'd been fighting all their lives, which they'd now projected onto me. At least this was my analysis of it after the event. So nobody paid any attention to anything that I ever suggested. And in fact, I had the distinct impression that colleagues opposed my ideas out of principle because I'd been given a leadership position that they felt I didn't deserve. I discovered much later that many of them resented the additional pay and teaching relief that they thought came with the role that they wanted. And the reality was that I actually got neither of those things. So things kind of went from bad to worse. People stopped turning up to meetings and events, and by the end it was just me and my PA doing everything. That was the centre, at least that's how it felt to me anyway. And then I went to the printer one day and I found an advert for a PA position in the local council. And I realised that even my PA could see the writing on the wall. And I realised, of course, without her, my team of two would be one. And yeah, let's just close this whole thing down. This is clearly not working. Now, I'd assumed that with the director of title in this first job, that people would naturally respect me and follow my lead. And they had done that with the previous director. So it wasn't an entirely crazy supposition to have made. But what I learned was that you have to earn the respect of your team. People might fear authority, but they rarely respect it naturally. Instead, I think people more instinctively respect leaders who are quietly comfortable in their own skin, who are vulnerable enough to lead with true authenticity and hence with a conviction that goes beneath the surface. The kind of person that I was describing for me when I talked about Hanifa earlier, and hopefully the kind of person that you've got in mind as well. And it is this journey into authenticity that's forced me to face the uncomfortable reality that behind the confident exterior I present to the world, there is a frightened little boy who can be panicked without warning, leaving me blank mid-speech in front of an audience or making decisions out of fear that I later regret. If I want to be a truly authentic leader, I can't hide that boy anymore. I have to make friends with him. I have to bring him on stage with me and help him realise that he has the courage to face his fears. Now, I've talked openly in previous episodes of this podcast about my own battle with depression over the years, and probably the most serious bout of that came to me after that first leadership role. And it was a multifactorial thing. It wasn't just that leadership role. There were other things going on at the time as well. But it's only in the last 18 months or so that I've had the courage to speak about the anxiety that still grips me on a regular basis. So I've joked about car crash speaking engagements where I was ambushed by panic attacks. That was what was actually going on before. I wrote about that in the Research Impact Handbook, in fact. But what I didn't admit was that this is actually an anxiety issue that has been an ongoing thing. And so I've learned coping strategies, as you will have done if you've ever had this kind of experience as well. So I write my speeches out word for word. So if I've got a panic attack and I go blank, I always know that there is my speech in front of me and I can just read until the panic subsides. And I make sure I've got a lectern so that I don't have to hold on to the bits of paper with my notes or the speech written out word for word, because otherwise people will see my hands shaking. And I think it's funny. People think, well, you're a professor. In fact, you've been professor for, I don't know how many years now, 8 years or something. Surely you don't get nerves when you're speaking. And yeah, there's plenty of times when I speak and I don't get nerves. But it is surprising how often it happens. But the big difference is I'm much better at hiding it now. I've got those coping strategies. So this is the challenge. A leader that hides their true self is not fully authentic. And yet, I don't want to undermine people's confidence in me as a leader or try and make people pity me by talking about this kind of stuff. I don't want to overshare. And yet I know that there is a deeper form of confidence that I can gain by trying to actually tackle some of these things and being open about where I am in that journey in terms of being myself. And of course, you can think a lot more clearly when you are not trying to keep your hand over the mouth of a boy who is trying to scream the whole way through your presentation, metaphorically speaking. And so standing there on stage with that little boy next to me, looking out anxiously over the audience, it is possible, I believe, to speak words of comfort, both to that worried little boy and to the audience. You don't need to worry for me. It's all good. It's under control. There is that self-compassion. We all have fears because we are frail and fallible. We are human beings. I'm just like you. You're just like me. I'm sure you relate to at least one aspect of what I'm talking about in terms of my own struggles as a leader. And if you still find yourself terrified by some of the things that you have to do as part of your job, whether you're a leader or not, then you are definitely not alone. And it's not just me. There are plenty of other people that I speak to, that I've coached and mentored in leadership roles, who are frankly terrified by many of the things that they have to do on a day-to-day basis. It is still possible to lead, despite those fears. And it is possible to lead as you, with that little boy nervously standing right next to you, giving him reassuring nods and smiles as you go. As you've probably heard, reading through the lines of what I'm talking about here, I've been influenced by Brené Brown and her leadership book, the name of which escapes me. I'll put a link to it in the show notes once I finish recording. And she's done a lot of work on shame and on vulnerability, and her argument is that it's only by understanding the places where we feel that deeper sense of shame that we can heal those places and fully inhabit ourselves and become authentic. And her definition of authenticity is simply about being who we are, not the people that others expect us to be. Very, very simple. But understanding that self-identity in a way that is secure enough that, you know what, I'm okay, I'm good enough just as me, is the first step to being able to be vulnerable enough as a leader to let others in to see you as the real person. And if we have to create this facade, this exterior, to protect ourselves from the world, from these people who are going to attack us as leaders, and that is almost inevitable, it's going to come to you, as I found in that first leadership role, then what people see is only that exterior. And it is very hard to create an empathic connection with an exterior, with a shell. And so it is about creating that authentic sense of self that is behind the shell enough that people can connect with you, that you can connect with them, that this is a two-way empathic connection so that we can lead in this empathic way, but in ways that are safe enough. And of course, for me, I've done the work. I've done that deep work. I've spent years working on my anxiety. And it was only when I felt that I had dealt with that well enough, with strong enough coping strategies, that I felt able to talk about them. So ask yourself what you need to do in terms of that deeper work in order to be the authentic leader that you want to be. Ask yourself, who are the role models that have inspired you? What is that first step you can take to be more like them? How can you be that servant leader that leads from behind? And I'm going to conclude with a quote from the chapter in my book. Impact needs empathic leaders who lead from behind by empowering those around them. They are often not recognised, and they are rarely thanked for what they do. The satisfaction that arises from this approach lies primarily in what they see others being enabled to do as a result of their actions. What I've heard some people refer to as second-hand glory. The power in this type of leadership comes from the deep places rather than the high places in this world.